good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 56th Hands-on Agile Meetup. Today, I'm really proud that we have a very special guest here. It's Diana Larsen, and you, of course, all know her from her fabulous book she co-authored with Esther Derby, Agile Retrospectives, and she will also tell us about her latest book later today. The reason I asked Diana to come and talk about something here is that the Agile Fluency Model is an awesome idea how teams actually develop over time within an organization. So because a lot of us believe, there's some sort of maturity model and you have different stages and then you can claim a certain level of expertise, but it's significantly more interesting. And Diana will share their findings with us. And we're really looking forward to them.
So when Stefan and I talked about this, we talked about how do we really engage with the Agile Fluency Model. And I realized I made a mistake there because I should have put after the word fluency a little registered trademark because it is registered. And James and I did that actually following the role modeling of the folks who put together the lean coffee, and they registered their trademark, although it seems to be honored in the exception more than the rule. But the thing is that many of the models that we encounter, I was in a conference, there's the XP conference in Copenhagen in June, and Alistair Coburn was there as well. And in his talk, he said he was talking about all the models that come forward, not just in the Agile world, but in general. And he said, in general, models either get completely ignored or misused. In other words, if they get used and become popular, they will also get misused. And so our registered trademark is a little bit of effort to see if we can minimize that misuse. Because gratefully, the Agile Fluency Model is being used in a number of places and being used more and more. In corporations, I've been invited to speak at actually big enterprise company conferences about the model and what it means in terms of team behaviors and how observing those team behaviors can be helpful in the organization, but also for, having internal folks, internal coaching groups, internal management groups and organizations learn more about the model to sort of inform their daily work. So we are getting some traction, and I think it is associated with the conversations that I've started to see, maybe you have too. I've started to see happening about dissatisfaction with some of the frameworks and methodologies and how they get applied, sometimes quite rigidly. And the idea that what is the agnostic view of Agile, which definitely is represented in the Agile Manifesto, but some folks feel that's a little dated. It's not as some of the ways things are stated there may not be as current with the way things are now, where there's so much remote teamwork in the world and so on. Anyway, I wonder. I don't have any data for this yet, but I wonder if some of the attention that the Agile Fluency Model is getting now is because it is an agnostic model. We don't ascribe to any particular framework or methodology. We look for something else. We're not assigned to a one-size-fits-all. If you have grown up throughout your life in the kind of body shape that I have, you know for sure that one size never fits all. And so I don't make that assumption ever, because I know that things need to be tailored. We need to pay attention to the nuances of how the situation is different. In some ways, every organization you walk into, you can identify many of the same problems. But often those same problems may arise from a variety of different circumstances going on in that organization, or from different perspectives, or what functional area seems to get the most attention, and so on. So we need a nuanced approach, and that isn't attached to any particular framework or package. So with the Agile Fluency Model, we started from a different place. We just said, let's make sure that the business or the organization, it doesn't even have to be a business, could be a nonprofit, could be any kind of organization. But if they have software teams working in and for their organization, they have some purpose for having those software teams. And the vision that we would like to see in the world, that we would like to manifest, is that wherever an organization says, oh yes, we do Agile here, we've taken an Agile approach, we've transitioned to Agile, wherever that's happening, that organization has teams who are doing their work well, according to the business's needs. They have the skills, the approaches, the mindsets, whatever it takes, the paradigms to give that organization the outcomes that the organization is looking for. And so, that's when businesses, that's when enterprises, that's when organizations prosper. And right now, we tend to focus quite a bit on Agile. I am not wedded to only ever working in an Agile way. What I've noticed is, so far in my career, the ideas behind Agile, the Agile Manifesto, the ideas behind teamwork, and the connection between the team and the business that show up in the Agile Manifesto, and the connection between the team and the customers that show up in the Agile Manifesto, that's the best I've found so far. Now, if somebody else comes along with something that's going to work better, I probably will jump ship and go after it. But I keep my eyes open for that, because I don't think the means are the end. I think that, we are looking for certain ends, and how we adjust our means will get us there. So this is what we want. We want an opportunity for, when people say we're using Agile, we've got an Agile approach, that what that means is that the teams are working well together. They are fluent at the level they need to be, with the skills and proficiencies they need to be fluent in. And the business and the teams and the customers have relationships that get everyone the outcomes that they need. So when I say fluency, what do I mean? And actually, Jim and I created the Agile Fluency Model after some experiences we'd had with some folks working on language fluency. And we said, well, what if we thought about that in terms of the kind of, not language skills, but software development skills? What would that look like? And that's how we came up with this term of Agile fluency. It's understanding the business value of team learning. What is it that the teams need to learn? Partly why I've written this book, and partly why I've been doing a lot of the work I've been doing over the years, is my sense that software development in particular, and lots of technical professions and practices in general, have moved beyond what Peter Drucker very presciently called knowledge work. I think we've moved beyond knowledge work into learning work. The world is moving so fast these days that our teams need to be constantly doing collective learning within the teams. And so fluency is learning those skilled actions that teams can apply automatically. They don't have to stretch into them. They aren't stopping to think deeply about it before they do them. It's just their normal, routine, smooth way of working. And when teams get into that space, it enables the flow of work. that performance persists even under pressure, distraction, stressors, someone coming in and going, you must, you must, you must. And they say, yes, we are, because this is the best way to work that we found. And so we are persisting with this. Fluency is that idea of praxis. It's that the deliberate application of both skills and the theory, the why we are using those skills. So teams that understand both of those things keep using the skills that they know are getting them closer to their why. And it comes from an investment in learning, in constant learning. And as you might expect, from somebody who's written a book called Agile Retrospectives and who's written a book called Liftoff and getting teams started and worked on the Agile Fluency Model and so on. And now this new book, I have a huge focus on how teams learn together and the value that comes from people really being able to build their co-intelligence within a team. So the Agile Fluency, now we'll get to the Agile Fluency Model. The simplest version of the Agile Fluency Model looks like this. Different people may present it in different ways, and that's okay. The underlying principle is that this is an opportunity to go on a ride on a bus. The idea that we can choose our destination, and no matter where the bus goes from there, we can get off at the destination that fits us best. But if we want to go to the next destination, we'll have to stay on that same bus to get there. So that is the nature of these zones. We call them zones: the focusing zone, delivering zone, optimizing zone, and strengthening zone. And today I'm going to focus more on the focusing, delivering, and optimizing, because strengthening is not a zone that we see very often. And I'm actually beginning, you'll notice there's a little tail coming off of the strengthening, kind of fades off there. We're beginning to see what might be on that tail, but I'll say more about that in a bit. So all of this starts with discovering opportunities. It starts with a conversation. We sit with leaders in an organization and we say, what are the benefits that you need from your teams? What are the desired outcomes? What are your expectations for the teams? We ask questions like, when you consider how to have things be more effective, what do you think might need to shift in your organization? And if that shift happened, what do you think you might see? What would be different in your organization if those shifts happen? And finally, if that successful shift occurred and you were able to make that happen, what's the why behind that? How would that affect your top or bottom line? How would that affect outcomes of value in your organization? Digging more deeply into where do the leaders want to go, what are the business needs for that organization or that department, whatever system we're working with, what's really required there. As you can maybe tell from these questions and these sets of questions, it leads people to deeper and deeper thinking and to really understanding their own why. I've gone into many organizations. I used to go into many organizations and ask the question, oh, okay, well, so you want to move to an agile way of working. That means you want to get more value. What's valuable around here? And discovering that there were no people in the organization who could answer that question. So in order to have a successful outcome, we kind of lead folks into asking those questions. And so that we can begin to get an idea of how much do they understand what they value in their organization? What are their next strategies and tactics and initiatives? What are they focused toward? And those kinds of things, because that helps us know what they might want and need from their teams. So we ask them, what benefits do you seek? And then we give them some ideas about what those benefits might be. Would you be satisfied if you could just tell what your teams are working on? You'd be amazed at how many people say, if I could only get that. If I could only get that, that would be such a leap forward. I'd be so happy with that. I could tell what they're working on. I know where our business value lies and how they're moving toward it. That would just give me so much understanding. I worked in an organization one time that was transitioning to Agile and had made a next release of their product as a part of that transitioning. And they were late. They weren't where they had originally planned to make this big release delivery. And I was talking with the vice president there, and I said, well, so what do you think about this transition? How are you? And he says, I love it. I love it. And I said, yeah, but the team still delivered late. And he said, yeah, but before never got notice that the team was going to deliver late until the day before I needed to tell the customer we were going to be late. This time, the team could tell me 3 months in advance what was happening, what was causing their progress to have slowed, what was in their way, asked me for help. I could go to the customers and tell them what was happening so that they could make plans for a later delivery. And that made all the difference for me. So the focusing zone can be quite valuable in a lot of ways for a lot of organizations. Some organizations need more benefit than that. So they need to know what the team's working on and how it's progressing. And they also need to know that there could be a release cadence that fits what the customer needs, and that our product people can decide when should that go out the door. And most organizations, one or two of those, either the focusing or the delivering, is where they need to be. 80% of the organizations I talk to, if they could get either of those, they choose which one or the other. That would satisfy everything that they believe they need. Now, this next one, optimizing, the benefits there are more the benefits that we as Agile coaches and folks who in the Agile community, this is maybe more what we have in mind, but it's not what every organization wants or needs. And so this has to do with really totally self-organizing teams, highly autonomous, have control over their product and what's going on with it, highly cross-functional, and so on. And they can talk to the business about how the business can improve or consolidate their position in the marketplace. So different companies have different needs. The need for delivering may be more intense in an organization whose main product is software. Focusing can be a better fit for organizations where the software is more an internal benefit and they don't need to take it out to the marketplace, and so on. So the idea of the Agile Fluency Model is, how do we prepare leaders and teams to work together to produce the benefits that the business needs? And so what we need to know is, what do we have to build on? So we look at the teams, and as I'll mention later, we have an Agile Fluency diagnostic that we can use, but we can also go in and just observe the behaviors that are happening in a team to figure out what's already happening. What is the relationship between teams and managers and leaders and product owners and teams and customers? And what strengths do we have to build on? And what intentions about learning can we build on? And what's strong in our overall system and what isn't? So what this means is that for every zone that the organization says, this is the one we need, this is what we really need our teams to be delivering for us, this is how we need them to produce the software that we need. For every zone, there are investments. And so we also look to see, use the model to look and see, are these investments being made? Are they not being made? Are they being made, but maybe not to the degree that we need them to be made, and so on. So these investments you hear us talk about a lot in the Agile community. Remove impediments to teamwork. And whether those come systemically or because of policies and procedures, or maybe just some other issue, we need to know what supports teamwork to happen in this organization and what gets in the way of teamwork. And, one of the things that can get in the way of teamwork is managers who haven't learned how to manage from a team perspective instead of an individual contributor perspective. And if the managers are still talking to the team members as individual contributors and trying to assign them tasks as individual contributors, that messes with any possibility of creating a collaborative environment for teamwork to happen. So those kinds of things. Ensure 100% of allocation to a team. Ideas about this have shifted over time, but with the ideas of dynamic reteaming and things like that. But the thing is, while you are on this team, you are 100% allocated to this team. We need that kind of investment in terms of how we think about how teams work together. There may be some cadence where we swap team members out and teams change, but we need to always know this current set of team members, this is their sole focus. Because that distraction of having multiple assignments to multiple teams and multiple products reduces so much the percentage of mind share that anyone can bring to a problem that they're working on. So keeping the teams together, not only 100% allocated, but keeping them together as long as it makes sense, and make sure that they have some connection to the business so that they know they have a good sense that they are working on the most valuable thing that they could be working on. That sense of purpose is so important for a team. Why Ainsley and I wrote the book Liftoff. It's kind of right from the beginning, help teams understand the purpose that they're working on. And then, make sure that there's a shared workspace where the team can get together, do what they need to do, focus together. That may be a virtual workspace or it may be a physical workspace. It doesn't matter. It's their space. So we want to make sure that they have that. And then we need managers who understand what's going to be needed from them to manage the work system, to manage teams, manage in a team environment, and so on. So there may need to be some mentoring, training, role modeling for those managers. And those are all investments. Some of these might cost some money. A lot of them don't. So in the delivering zone, we need all that stuff we had in the focusing zone, but then we also need investments around the more intense professional learning that's going to be needed in the delivering zone, really making sure that those highest possible level of engineering practices are second nature to everyone on the team. And when we are learning, we of necessity have to slow down a bit to learn. And that may mean a little bit lower productivity, almost always does. And so having the patience to kind of wait through that till we get on the other side and we get the accelerated production that comes from the new learning. We need the slack for refactoring. We can't try to assign every moment of the day. We need to be able to say, this is an important part of keeping our code clean, keeping our flow going. And so we're not going to mess around with team members who say, no, refactoring is a part of my work. Making sure that other technical disciplines that the team might need besides just software development, software programming, those are actually brought into the team as well. Maybe someone representing the perspectives of DevOps, someone representing user experience, technical writing. I mean, different products are going to need different sets of technical disciplines. So we want to make sure that those are present in this team. And then the training and technical practices that mean the lower productivity, and hiring for these teams so that different teams have folks in them who can mentor their teammates, or hiring in interim technical coaches, folks like that who can help the team maintain their delivering zone or build their delivering zone fluency. In the optimizing zone, the organization also needs to make some investments. The optimizing zone can be very disruptive in an organization. It's a really different way of working when whole teams focus on whole products or whole customer segments and make sure that they are getting what they need. But on the other hand, having a completely cross-functional team, including business expertise and anyone, maybe subject matter expertise. Worked in an organization one time that was building software that ran the mass spectrometer equipment. And on their team, they not only had a product person who had a good sense of what the marketplace needed, the marketplace that bought mass spectrometers, what they needed, but also what did the chemists need and what went into the product that managed that chemical analysis. So everybody needs to be in the team when you're in the optimizing zone. And the teams probably has responsibility for their own budgeting, their own planning, because they're the ones who understand the customer needs best. They also have to understand the business needs. And so they are optimizing those. That's where we get the name for this. They are sort of jointly optimizing the customer needs and the business needs, and that's happening within the team. And then the rest of the organization needs to not get nervous and start judging because the team isn't following some strict plan created by the organization, but is actually producing the results that they need. And if those results aren't happening, then that's the conversation. How do we get closer to those results? This is the overarching Agile Fluency Model. It's got the zones, this pre-Agile, which, if you've got a product that is a repeatable process and you can hand that off to individual contributors and it's all working out well for you, stick with it. There's no need to call yourself Agile just because everybody else is calling themselves Agile. The only reason is if you're not getting the outcomes that you need, then you may want to look at moving away from that individual contributor into a team culture and the collaboration culture that's going to get you closer to what you need. So there's a little more information on this. If you notice up in the left-hand corner of this graphic, it says positive, inclusive, and promotes improvement. And those were sort of the guiding values that Jim and I and all the people that we talked to as we were creating this model that we kept in mind. We weren't interested in knocking any of the other folks at doing whatever they were doing. We also knew that probably every model and framework out there had something to contribute in some place at some time, right? And so the skill becomes, how do we figure out what belongs where, which practices, which proficiencies are going to help in which situations. And then finally, things that promote improvement, that keep moving the team toward greater and greater match with providing the organization with what they need, as well as having a workplace that is well suited to the team members and so on. So the other part of this that I told you I'd mention later is that little tail coming off of the strengthening zone. The strengthening zone is when the teams actually are focused on the health of the overall organization. Generally fairly small organizations, we find that might be using the strengthening zone. The level of communication overhead between and among the different parts of that organizational system are so great that it really isn't super suited to a very, very large bureaucratic organization. They just can't sustain it. We have sustained for optimizing zone teams, but not for strengthening zone teams. And so that's why I don't spend a lot of time talking about that. The little tail that's coming off of strengthening zone has to do with some of the teams I'm beginning to see out there in the world whose focus is not on the stories, not on the features, not on the product, not on the organization, but on the good of the community or societal good. And that's what's driving the behaviors of those teams. And they have additional proficiencies that they need to learn and understand in order to take on those kinds of team projects. We're beginning to see those, but not well enough to really be able to call out all of those things. And there may be something beyond that. So we don't even think that this model is necessarily completely finished, or we know there is still more to learn about the Agile Fluency Model, and we're really eager to learn it. So this graphic has some things on it. The Agile Fluency Model is accompanied by a couple of other things that we call the Agile Fluency Suite. Diagnostic, you can use a tool or you can use observation, and then also an improvement cycle, a way of talking to leaders in an organization and the coaches in an organization and so on, with a lot of feedback loops, as you can see on here, that help folks move through the zones that they need to be in and make sure that they're still promoting improvement, still making that progress. All that's continuing with all of these feedback loops. If you would like a copy of this large graphic here, comes in a A4 US letter size PDF. Be happy to share that with you. Just contact us at info@agilefluency.org or at this URL, agilefluency.org contact.php, and say Diana presented to us and we'd like to get a copy of the big graphic, and that someone will send that to you. So, questions?
Awesome. So there are questions. Let me get started. So Thomas asked, question for understanding. Organizations should select the zone they want to invest in based on the benefits they want to get. Do you not have to start with focusing, then delivering, and so on? Correct?
That's a common question. Thank you for asking it. Jim Shore likes to play pool, and he says, when you're playing pool, there's this thing where you call your shot. You say where you want the ball to go. And that's the same thing. It's why we have that conversation with the leaders, is we want to understand what do they need these teams to produce. And then we can talk them through the model and they can say, well, we're clearly going to have a delivering zone team. And then we know we need to make a plan that's going to get them all of the focusing zone proficiencies and all of the delivering zone proficiencies. And we can start that all at once. Often the focusing zone proficiencies come first, but not always, depending on the nature of the people on the team and so on. They may grab a hold of the XP engineering practices first and then realize later that if they want collective coding standards, they're going to have to be more collaborative and they're going to have to learn to be, So we've seen that dance happen as well. And then optimizing needs all the other previous two as well. But like I said, a lot of organizations decide focusing zone fluency, gosh, their lives would be so much better. And I've worked with some of these organizations. Our lives would be so much better if we had that. A lot of times they are organizations that are producing deliverables that have a short term, a short life. So they don't have to worry so much about technical debt, because this thing's only going to be around for a few months or half a year or something like that anyway, before they replace it with something else. Or, maybe they're working mostly on infrastructure projects and they get a lot of opportunities to talk with their customers because they are other employees of the same organization. And so, they're not quite as tied to a deliverable date, like you got to get it out by Christmas, right? It's a different sense of timing. So in those instances, focusing zone really works pretty well. So we also need to understand the nature of the product that the teams are building, as well as the business outcomes and desires and so on, or what the leaders have in mind. Oftentimes, if we talk to a group of leaders, folks or the product development folks will be, we need optimizing zone right now. And it's like, well, that's going to take you to really get there. It may be worth the journey, but it's probably going to take you a couple of years. So just understand that. And if you think that's worthwhile, then let's go after that. So yeah, it's figuring out where you need to be with your teams and then moving in that direction. And then getting off the bus when you don't need to go further. Because every one of those zones costs more than the other one and takes a longer time. So,
Speaking of teams, what if the delivery team does not want to take shared responsibility?
my first instinct is to say they don't really want to work together as a team. I may be off base. That may not be what this person meant, but just in case they did, that means they need to work more on the fluent proficiencies and skills in that focusing zone, because the focusing zone is all about that. And they don't have fluency there. So that's maybe where we have to start the work, helping that team really learn to be a collaborative team. And I've been working with organizations moving to team-based structures since the early 90s. So for a very long time. And in very many of those transitions, there was someone or someones who really didn't want to, they wanted to keep their role as an individual contributor. They didn't want to rely on any other team members and so on. You know, sometimes there are people who cannot make that shift. And so we look for, well, where are the roles that they could play that only need one person so they wouldn't have to be part of a team? In one instance, only one in all these years, but there was an instance where the person was so adamant because right now they were the bottleneck for certain kinds of information that the team needed. And they valued that ability to sort of govern how much information they did or didn't give out. It was so much a part of their identity, they couldn't give it up. Well, they weren't a good candidate for shifting to team-based work. The organization really couldn't identify anywhere else where they needed somebody who was like that. And so they helped that person find a role outside the organization. One of my rules always when I'm working on a transition like that is nobody gets fired. Some people may choose they don't want to go forward and then they get helped to find another position, but nobody gets fired. Because if anybody's going to get fired when you're talking about a transition, pretty soon nobody's cooperating. So yeah, that's my best guess at the answer for that question.
Yeah, actually, it's a pretty simple principle. There's no role security but job security, because otherwise no
Yes.
one will cooperate.
Right. Exactly.
Dead on
Yeah.
arrival, right? Okay, next question. The company I work in seems to be very good at optimizing and good at delivering, but not good at focusing. Do zones always follow each other? Do you have any experience with organization working backwards?
One of the things that we've learned, I mean, you put a model into the world. This is the thing I've learned over time after having written a lot of books and contributed a lot of models. You put the model out into the world and then it starts teaching you back, which is great. One of the things that Jim and I have learned, and he represents in his more recent book, The Art of Agile Development, second edition, he talks a lot about the Agile Fluency Model in there. And he writes in there about one of the things we've learned, which is we've said for years, the Agile Fluency is not a maturity model. It's not a maturity model. And it's not. The maturity is not zone to zone to zone. An optimizing zone team is not necessarily more mature than a focusing zone team. It's all about, are they meeting the business needs? But within the focusing zone, you can have a less mature focusing zone team and a more mature focusing zone team, right? So I would guess in the situation you're talking about, there is something going on in their system that is keeping them, they may be attempting optimizing zone fluency, but I bet there is something keeping them from fully reaching optimizing zone fluency, becoming fully mature as an optimizing zone team, if they don't have that ability to work well together as a team and to talk to the business in their language. Domain-driven design, right, is being able to speak with the business in their language. You're going to need domain-driven design in the optimizing zone or something very similar to it. I mean, it's great if your organization is supporting really autonomous teams and so on, but I would start looking for how well are those teams working together, and are they getting the maximum amount of flow they could be getting in that situation?
Okay, next one. Anna asks, for teams that cannot allocate 100% of the time, should the business then take that as an indicator that they need to hire more people?
There's two choices here. They can hire more people, or they can have less work in progress at a given time. Either one is fine. They either need to be able to spin up teams that can fully focus on a single piece of work, or they need to just try to push less work through so they could use the people they have and keep them very focused. Even in dynamic reteaming, the organization has to limit the volume of work that they're trying to push through, or build smaller products so the team can finish something, push it out, and then go on to something else. I mean, there's all those, if you've got A, B, and C to do you want to work on A, B, and C all at the same time, or do you want to work on A and B and then C, and what gets done first? It's that same principle. We've seen that a lot.
Okay, next question. Max, does the model apply to any delivery context, even within operations? Any examples?
Interestingly enough, that question has been coming up a lot lately, just in the last couple of years. As people are thinking more about business agility and thinking more about agile approaches outside of software development and IT and DevOps, we're beginning to get questions. And some folks have written books on the Agile agency, about graphic design and marketing agencies that are beginning to adopt some of the Scrum or Kanban principles and those kinds of things. I think a lot of what goes on in the focusing zone is applicable to almost any team that wants to work in a really effective team-based way. There are going to be little things about it that they're kind of software specific, but I think it's pretty generalizable. Optimizing zone, we're talking about fully cross-functional teams that have all the people on them, that all the business perspectives, everything that they need on the team. So that already kind of encompasses those other functions. It's delivering zone that is the most focused on software engineering specific proficiencies. So what my advice has been is, if you've got a marketing team or a legal team and they're already are good at focusing zone stuff, but they're not able to pump out the work on a regular cadence, and you want them to be more like a delivering zone team, well, then examine the professional practices and proficiencies that are needed for their function and figure out which ones are essential for them to be able to release at will, whatever that means in their professional area. So when people are asking me, can they create a different, Agile fluency zone? I would say I would call it, a marketing fluency model or a HR fluency model. I wouldn't call it Agile fluency, because Agile fluency is very specific to software development. But I think it's possible to generalize some of these, how do teams work well together principles to pretty much any team that needs to be working together.
Max has another question.
Oh,
I like that one. How is the Agile Fluency Model related or not to SAFe?
It's related to SAFe in the way that it's related to Scrum or Kanban or domain-driven design or, any of the approaches that are out there. Fast Agile, that's one of Jim's favorites. The idea is that there are going to be places where SAFe is exactly the right thing. And that's why we want to do this sort of tailored, nuanced examination of what the organization is after, so that we can learn, is this the right place for some of the practices and proficiencies in SAFe? or is it not? And where I get upset, I guess, or sad maybe, is when I see organizations who have been encouraged to just adopt a framework or a methodology or whatever, because that's what the coach consultant happens to be selling, and not because it's what that organization really needs. I've seen some very small organizations being encouraged to take on all the full load of all the safe practices. That's malpractice in my mind. But that doesn't mean that safe doesn't belong somewhere. I mean, there are folks who've had good luck with it, and it was created in a place where it evidently was just the right application in that organization. See, that's the problem with all these methods and frameworks, is there is some place where they were created, and then people said, well, it worked here, so it must work everywhere. And that's not true. Right? I mean, just like best practices. Best practices are only a best practice in one place. And unless you have that same identical situation, you're going to need to adjust that practice to fit your organization, to make it the most effective thing in your own organization. That's why I said Agile Fluency Model is methodology and framework agnostic. Or maybe not to the extent that we say, don't just go to a methodology and a framework as your first step, but first do some examining and decide maybe which one has the most stuff you want and which parts of that are you going to keep. I mean, a lot of them work like a basket. If you don't have all the pieces and parts that they provide, you're going to have a leaky basket, right? Your basket isn't going to hold the things you want it to hold. And so you have to watch out for that. Are we losing anything here that's going to cause this whole thing to kind of come undone? But, it's a lot of instances where you don't need it all. I think that, some of the folks I've heard that say, oh, the Agile Fluency Model, blah, 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 say that because they think we are disrespecting their favorite model or method. And we don't. We think there's very good chance, very high probability that they all have a right place and a right time. We just don't know what that is yet until we investigate.
Scott has a very interesting question. Does the inability of large organizations to be able to move into the strengthening level of the model hold them back and allow startups to compete with them more easily? Does it also mean that large organizations are less suited to address societal concerns?
Well, strengthening zone isn't about societal concerns. Strengthening zone is about a team that is devoted to the health of the overall organization and has the information it needs to fulfill that. And so, most large organizations that I know don't have the bandwidth to start discussing internally whether they want to go to sociocracy or not. They might be discussing whether they want to go to beyond budgeting in some parts of the upper levels of the organization, but it's still going to take them a while to make that shift. And that's why we don't really put a timing on the strengthening zone. Strengthening zone seems to work best, interestingly enough, in startup organizations, where people begin from the beginning to have good camaraderie on their teams, because the teams are very small and everybody knows each other and they figure out how to have their best meetings. The product manager is probably constantly sitting with the team that's developing this brand new thing to put out into the world. And they're all interested in, how close are they getting to the IPO and right? Those conversations aren't happening in larger organizations. As organizations grow, it becomes more bureaucratized. They can no longer talk about every topic across the whole organization and have those discussions and decisions made across the organization. That can only really happen in smaller groups, just a function of how people exchange information. In team topologies, they talk a lot about the various Dunbar's numbers and what's possible at different scales of Dunbar's number. That's basically the thing that keeps large organizations from moving beyond teams that can function in the optimizing zone. Although if they've got like a small skunk works off to one side, maybe the team that developed the Mac, we would call them a strengthening zone team, and they contributed to the good of the overall Apple way back when in the 80s or 90s, whenever that was, but not in general, not in a production kind of way, because that just takes too many people talking to too many people. In the Lead Without Blame book, we've got one of those Metcalfe's law graphics that talks about, the number of connections that you need for everybody to talk to everybody in a group and how it goes. So that's why it's not that somebody wouldn't want to be a strengthening zone, but if your heart is in really knowing what's going on in your whole organization, and you really want to be able to have that be your purpose to help create an organization be successful and be really tied to that success, then you probably want to look for a smaller organization to be a part of, a smaller team to join in an organization that's just growing or is intentionally staying small. We are also seeing those kinds of organizations that just have decided that growth at all cost is not in their best interest. And they're just going to stay a 2 or 3 team organization. They're never going to have a software development department that's bigger than 18 or 20 people. And that's it. They're going to focus on products that they can build at that scale.
Okay, next question. How would you apply the fluency model to an underperforming team that's supposedly gone past the stage on the fluency model?
I guess I'd want to know where the supposedly comes from, because the Agile Fluency Model is a model of observable team behaviors. So I guess somebody could stand up and say, I'm on an optimizing team when they don't own their whole product and they don't have any other cross functionality in their team and whatever. And in which case they just don't understand the model. When you dive more deeply into the model, what you find are specific behaviors that you look for in the focusing zone. Our team's able to handle the conflicts that come up in a really good way. Every team has conflicts. You can't avoid it, but you can also deal with them in such a way that enhances your creativity. So how's this team doing when they have conflicts? Are they focused on their retrospectives or other means of continuous improvement? Are they doing that? There's a whole long list, right? Are they meeting the business needs? Are they looking at the health of the whole team? Those kinds of things. And are they focused on their co-intelligence? Are they really learning together? If you see those behaviors, then you can sort of confidently say, well, this team clearly is on the journey toward full focusing zone fluency. We don't know exactly where they are yet, but it's going to look different for every team, but they're obviously on the journey. On the other hand, if we see continuous integration, continuous delivery and deployment, those kinds of things on a regular basis in a team, but they can't agree on their coding standards and so on, well, they've made some progress toward delivering zone fluency, but they're being held back because they don't have some of these focusing zone proficiencies yet. So you look at the behaviors of what's going on in the team, or what I like to do is I ask the team, do you do this? Do you do that? If so, how often? What happens when you do it? And that sort of thing, because it has to be based on what's really going on in the team. It can't be based on just somebody's assertion about how a team is doing. And we get a lot of that from managers and leaders. Oh, my team's, yeah. It's like, well, how do you know that? What have you seen that gives you that, or heard that gives you that impression? We want it based on observable behavior. And then we figure out where we need to go from there.
Diana, there's a last question.
Okay.
Do you suggest any optimization index for IT companies, or cannot we say something in general?
My index is, are you getting the outcomes you want? And if you're not, have you investigated what investments you need to get them? In general, teams step up. In my experience, teams step up to deliver when they're clear about what they need to deliver, when they're given the support they need. I mean, all those 12 principles in the Agile Manifesto, if those things are present, teams step up, right? Teams deliver what they're needed to deliver. Or the Project Aristotle, did they have psychological safety? Are they focused on their dependability? Do they feel like they have impactful work? Is their work meaningful to them? There's a fifth one that I always forget. But, you can use any of those. One of the things that we say is that the Agile Fluency Model is a model of team behavior. It's not a model about organizations. It's what can we observe that's going on in the team. However, it has enormous organizational and leadership implications. And when you aggregate together where a lot of teams are in terms of their fluency, and you look at them in the aggregate, it tells you a lot about what's going on in that system, that organizational system. So teams, particularly teams, when we look at them in aggregate, are fractals of the larger system. They're little canaries in the coal mine. So if you're not getting what you need from your teams, it's not time to beat up the teams. It's time to look at what's going on in the system that isn't getting you what you need.
Diana, your latest book has been available on the market for about 2 weeks. What is it all about? Can you share something about the content?
Lead Without Blame is a book about moving toward a form of leadership that invests in team learning. Because what we know is that judgment, blame, shame, those kinds of dynamics that go on in organizations actually inhibit learning. And we are in a world now that learning is so incredibly important for how we move forward. Our ability to learn our way through every kind of chaos the world can throw at us. And when we have the confidence to do that, we can survive and thrive and that kind of resilience. There's a couple of parts to the book. The first part of the book is about how do we shift as leaders at every level of the organization. How do we shift our behaviors as leaders to move away from some of those habits like blaming and shaming and some other ones that we name to leadership behaviors that enable teams to create the results? And then the second part is about the resilient learning teams and where we need to focus what we call on the resilience factors. What are a few of the things that we really need to focus on, and how can we move through those to really help teams become resilient learning teams? So there's the leadership part and there's the learning part. And all through the book, we have sample retrospective formats that people can use to achieve some of these different goals. And then we also have a lot of different kinds of questions. We have some questions that we call the what ifs about this education. What about if that's going on? How do I overcome that? We've got a bunch of those. We've got reflection questions for people to ask themselves. So it's a book, it has content, but it also has learning prompts. And I'm really eager to hear how people are engaging some of those learning prompts as they read the book and over time.
Diana, that was awesome. Thank you so much for donating your time to the community and walk us through the Agile Fluency Model, which is awesome.
If you've got any more questions, I really encourage you to go to the agilefluency.org website. There's a 10-minute video. It says a lot of the things I just said. There's a free downloadable ebook that gives you a little more information. And then if you want even more than that, I really recommend you go buy Jim's Art of Agile Development 2nd edition book, along with Lead Without Blame.
Awesome. Diana, thank you so much.
Thank you.